Hello everyone, I'm Quantum Noddle. The following review for Valkyria Chronicles contains mechanical as well as story spoilers for the entire game. If you have yet to play Valkyria Chronicles, I suggest you do so. Valkyria Chronicles was developed by Sega and originally released on the PlayStation 3 in 2008. Since then, it has received ports to the PC and PS4. Personally, it served as a huge selling point for the PS3. Valkyria Chronicles opens with us assuming the role of Welkin Gunther, a university student returning to his hometown of Brule. Here he meets Alicia Melchiot, who is part of the town's guard. They defend Brule from the invading Imperial forces, and this is the player's introduction and tutorial to the real core of the game, the unique blend of turn-based strategy and real-time action, which is dubbed the Blitz system, or Battle of Live Action Tactical Zones. You are handed 3 of the same class of character on a very easy map in order to get a feel for the gameplay. After defeating the small unit of invading soldiers, Welkin and Alicia, along with Welkin's Darkson sister Isara, drive out of town with the Edelweiss, their father's old tank. Just a little note, the Darkson are an oppressed ethnic minority in the world of Valkyria Chronicles. The group then makes it to Randgries in order to join the militia to protect their homeland. Welkin is appointed lieutenant of Squad 7 and he reunites with his boy Faldio.
What do you know? It is you. Nice coincidence, huh, Welkin? Faldio?
You son of a bitch.
Who also went to the same university for archaeology. From here, the player is given the option of dozens of different potential squad mates from several different classes. The scouts, who were introduced in the tutorial, whom carry rifles and can move further than all other classes. Shock troopers, which carry short-range machine guns, great for taking out infantry. The anti-tank class lancers, who shoot their big rockets into the rears of tanks.
Hey, soldier!
Engineers, who are basically just less sturdy scouts that carry more grenades, can heal better than any other class, they can disarm mines, as well as repair tanks, blockades, and sandbags. There are snipers, who are extremely useful for headshotting infantry from far away, and not a whole lot else. Finally, you have tanks, which can be fitted with different parts for whichever situation, and are heavily armored, capable of driving right into standard bullets without taking any damage. Instead of individuals leveling up independently, each class can be leveled up as a whole by spending EXP to train. Eventually, each class gets a promotion. Scouts can launch grenades further, shock troopers get flamethrowers, good for taking out groups, and lancers get mortars. New weapons and equipment can be researched and developed with money the player acquired completing missions. Or, new weapons can be earned through various milestones. Each battle is split up into the enemies and the player's phase. During a phase, the player or enemy is given a set amount of command points, or CP. They use these points to control units, ask for reinforcements, and employ orders. More on that later. Once the points are used, or if the player or enemy chooses to end their turn prematurely, the opposing side gets their turn and their CP is refilled. If ended prematurely, the unused CP rolls over into the next turn. This system lends a lot of flexibility to the game compared to a conventional turn-based system like in Fire Emblem, where once a unit has performed their actions, they can't be used again until the following phase. If one wished to do so, they can use 10 CP in a row on the same unit to get a certain task done, with a surprising amount of efficiency if well planned. Though this can be abused by a savvy player, thanks to a few other systems implemented in the game, it is typically impractical to do so. The Scout, Shock Trooper, and Engineer have unlimited ammo for their guns, but have a limited amount of grenades. Lancers have a max of 3 rockets, and Snipers have a max of 3 rifle rounds. To regain more ammunition for those units, the player must either wait until the next turn to basically regenerate an additional shot, or use an Engineer to resupply the other units. One can't abuse the power of the Sniper and Lancer, but instead must set up situations or position units where they can hit the enemy's weak point while considering the limit on ammo. Movement is also limited by action points, or AP. Units can move freely until their AP runs out. AP for a character is also reduced every subsequent turn that character is used during that phase. During the first turn, a unit is allowed to fully use their max AP. On the second turn, they will start at 2/3 AP. The third turn, they will be at 1/3 AP. Then after the fourth, they will be at 50 AP until the next phase. This makes scouts incredibly useful in terms of getting around the battlefield, but eventually puts a leash on everyone so they aren't zipping around the whole time, running to the objective in an instant. Another unique aspect of the game is that all units other than the lancers and snipers are allowed to fire at enemies that are moving around and that enter their line of sight. Typically, this works in the enemy's favor as a way to prevent the player from bum rushing the objective, but occasionally the enemy will attempt the same tactic and get gunned down. Though they usually seem to stop in their tracks when they get hit, which is sometimes actually beneficial if you're trying to prevent the enemy from advancing on your bases, this defensive mechanic lends the game a sense of urgency and tension when moving about. Turn a corner and there could be someone ready to gun you down before you can raise your weapon. You quickly learn that it's smarter to approach from an angle that doesn't trigger the enemy to shoot back. Positioning means a lot, and you could even boost your defenses by hiding in tall grass or using sandbags as cover. Or if you remain standing, you are left open to the enemy's attacks, but your units have a quicker reaction time shooting at enemies on the move. So there's kind of an interesting choice on playing defensive or a little more offensive. Coming together, the tools that the computer and player are given work fairly well. Though a sort of simple rock, paper, scissors-like design where tanks beat infantry, lancers beat tanks, and infantry beats lancers, it stays interesting due to the action, strategy, and tension the systems bring. The game throws unique challenges at the player with its varied mission design and with the introduction of various orders partway through the game. Every main mission feels unique either due to its location and map design or your objective. Most maps you succeed by clearing a path to a designated point, clearing out all enemies, or destroying a particular unit unique to that map. But there will usually be some sort of interesting obstacle in your way. Maybe the enemy brought a super tank this mission, or in another, a sandstorm is concealing your enemy's movement. It would almost be difficult to fail a mission if not for one particular restraint. Welkin's death during mission means instant game over. It feels like a carryover from the Fire Emblem philosophy of design. The commander goes down, and there's no way to continue. So, you're at a high risk of failure if you throw Welkin into a dangerous situation, and he has to be part of practically every mission, just kind of let him stay back. After a mission, you are graded on your performance and rewarded EXP and money to upgrade your units. The grading has a strange quirk. One may think that a game centered around treating soldiers like actual individuals would want you to play cautiously so your guys are safe. Nope, just finish the mission ASAP. The grade is purely based on how many turns you took. With that in mind, you may soon realize that the gameplay will get a bit ridiculous balance-wise. If you know the right decisions to make, you will blaze through the battlefield with an absurd level of efficiency. Abuse orders like crazy. For some reason, in games, I'm always hesitant to utilize resources when it comes to items or limited use power-up states. I neglect those features in fear that I might not have them when I really need it. So trust me here, abuse orders. There are some that make you have absurdly high defense, which make your scouts extremely resistant to bullets, allowing them to beeline through no man's land, when otherwise they would have been shredded to ribbons. Don't spend 4 CPU moving your slow-ass lancer around the tank's Star Wars death spot. Instead, order your scout to boost their damage, and take out the tank in one quick motion with enough AP to reach the next enemy. Smart use of orders makes some parts laughably easy, because you found a more efficient use of CP, and thus will reap greater rewards come grading time. Okay, I got all this gameplay stuff out of my system. Valkyria Chronicles features dozens of named characters, though only about a fourth of them have any relevance to the plot. The main protagonists are fairly likable, perhaps a little too saccharine for a game that is taking inspiration from one of the worst moments of human history, but the main ones manage to be cute, quirky, and likable without straying too far into eye-roll territory. They are cheery, which is nice when you play a bunch of games where everyone is a sullen mope. I particularly like the lead character, Welkin, because he is sort of a dork, but in a way that is adorkable. A main character of a game about war could easily have been a stoic badass. He could have been a shonen protagonist who was always hungry and ready to prove himself like the guy from Valkyria Chronicles 2. Instead, Welkin is kind, virtuous, intelligent, and a fantastic leader. Welkin's a cornball who just wants to live a quiet life as a teacher, taking in the wonders of nature. He reminds me of Tom Hanks in Saving Private Ryan, a leader who knows his responsibilities and fights for others' sake. Alicia Melchiot serves as a girl-next-door type. She's got a thing for Welkin, but being the goober that Welkin is, it takes a bit before he realizes that. I guess for someone like Welkin, looking at bugs is more titillating than getting to know a cute baker that is also one of the best scouts in the game. For the audience's sanity, this romance cluelessness doesn't last the entire game. Largo Potter is an old veteran of the First European War, a gruff man who hides a softer side. He is actually a farmer who loves vegetables.
Vegetables!
Bridget Rosie Stark is the main shock trooper of Squad 7. She is a singer and has a bigoted attitude towards the Darksons. Isara is Welkin's adopted sister and the cutie of the team.
Thank you to watch your tongue in this house. Welks.
Like her father, she is quite the inventor, and despite discrimination, she keeps her head up and fights for her country. Gallia, the country that you're fighting for, has a policy of universal conscription. Your recruitment pool is made up of people ranging from age 14 to 65. Each soldier has their own likes, dislikes, backstory, and personality. Though not directly elaborated on in the main story, each squad mate has their own personnel entry where you can learn a bit about why they fight, what they did before the war, and what they may want to do once this is all over. The characters tend to fall into cliché anime stock character tropes, which I'm not dissing. The use of a simple character archetype gives everyone enough personality to be likable and makes it easy for the player to pick up on what they're about so they can choose who they like for the team. Maybe you'll even grow attached to some of them. If you highlight Jan and don't immediately fall in love with John DiMaggio's best Paulin impression, I don't know what to tell you.
Hey, soldier! I'm Jan Walker. I'll fight with everything I've got.
It's hard to find at least someone you won't like. Vice and Ica from Sega's Skies of Arcadia are also in the game along with Fina, who is the team's medic. It's a really cool cameo. You can just have the main character from this other series as a squad mate. During battle, each soldier's quirks shine through. You may have someone that hates crawling around in the dirt, thus they become weaker in field areas. You may have someone that loves another character, and then they get a little more accurate at shooting when they're near that person. These individual traits that can be triggered are called potentials. Hidden potentials can also be unlocked for your units, which can be extremely beneficial, like Lynn's Hard Worker potential, which lets her take 2 actions in 1 turn. It's surprisingly fun leading a squad that's made up of personalities that you enjoy. The game isn't as punishing as a game like Fire Emblem. Though units can permanently die, they first go into a wounded state and will die after 3 turns or if an enemy unit touches them. However, if a friendly unit reaches them or if you use an order to rescue them, they will live and be ready to be called back in the next player phase. Brought to you by Ragmaid. Though I understand it's impossible to change for the story that they're trying to tell, it's a bit strange that about 5 units are immortal because of plot armor, while everyone else can die forever. Rosie gets blown up by a tank shell, and she just runs away to fight another day. Ted gets shot in the leg, bleeds over 3 turns, and that's it for him. Again, I get why it's this way, it's just odd that the game says that these people matter more, when a thematic message in the game is that the common folk matter just as much as those in charge. This leads to battles where you're able to put Rosie, Largo, Alicia, and Zaka in far more dangerous situations because there's no risk of ever losing them. Also, they add an additional CP per phase, so you have very little reason not to bring the main characters along for a fight. As the leader of Squad 7, Welkin initially bumps heads with 2 of his subordinates. Largo, a skeptical, experienced veteran, and Rosie, a racist asshole.
She'll blow us all up. Besides, I can't stand the stink of her.
Though Welkin quickly proves himself with his fast-thinking and analytical prowess, gaining the loyalty of his team. Isara stands up for herself against Rosie's rantings, and we get a picture of what she believes about Darkson people. They are blamed for some tragedy in the past, and they smell funny. Though sort of corny in its anime ways, Valkyria Chronicles doesn't completely skirt around prejudice, but it doesn't fully explore the issue either. Hair color seems like a really weird thing to discriminate against. Perhaps that is entirely the point. This behavior is something everyone is sort of taught, though I feel like the game wants us to think that only Rosie and a couple of the villains are racist. As a hero with a Darkson sister, Welkin is used to a Darkson person around, but no one else really brings it up in a casually racist way. More on that later. The squad finds themselves in a skirmish in the desert. Apparently, long ago, the Darkson used dark magic to destroy the land here.
Besides, no evidence exists to substantiate what you call the Darkson calamity. It's a myth. Excuse me?
I've just got all the documents.
The Imperials have set up a base in search for some ancient artifacts. The game again demonstrates its unique scenarios by including a sandstorm which conceals the player as they cross a large open area.
Where sleeps the ancient power?
Squad 7 runs into Emperor Maximilian and Selvaria, his most powerful subordinate. Everyone decides to take things outside. Max is driving his big-ass super tank, the Batimus, and you need to disable it by taking out its turrets, blocking its path with debris, and destroying its engines. With the tank destroyed, Selvaria steps in to allow Maximilian to escape. She deflects a tank shell, and this is a great showcase for how beautiful this game is.
Did you see that? She deflected a tank shell.
Such power.
A mission later, Vulcan and Alicia are separated from the rest of Squad 7. The two need to make their way through a forest being patrolled by Imperial forces. Alicia is injured and moves a whole lot slower. After this mission, Squad 7 meets with the Princess of Gallia to receive commendations for their efforts reclaiming Vassal Bridge. The princess is kidnapped by the Atlantic Federation, a large country that wishes to use Gallia for its resources. You stop the getaway car and save the princess. Missions like this give the game a nice change of pace. You need to get in the way of the car to prevent the escape. Afterwards, Vulcan speaks to the princess, calling her out on her bullshit and saying she's making excuses on why she doesn't do more for her people. But he says this kind of in a polite way, and this kind of gets at Princess Cordelia, and some changes begin to occur, and lets her kind of reflect on her role as a leader.
I had the cooks add cinnamon rolls to my daily breakfast.
Squad 7 goes to an Imperial work camp to meet Zaka, a Darkson man who wants to help fight back. Using explosives, the plan is to destroy the tracks underneath the Empire's war train Equus, which is under the command of Gregor. Equus is perched high above the mining town of Falzon, watching over both the enslaved miners and invading forces. During this mission, you must avoid the train's bullets raining hell upon you while trying to position yourself close enough to shoot the bombs to take out the track supports.
Sploosh.
Rosie, who has warmed up a small amount to Zaka, is enraged to find that the Empire has torched a building full of Darkson people, including children. Somehow this doll survived. That doesn't make much sense, but whatever. Rosie sees the horrible conditions that Darksons go through, and this sparks a change in her character. She is still too proud to admit it, but she begins to accept that maybe her prejudices were unfair. In a mission where the team needs to storm a fortress, Isara invents smoke grenades, which are extremely useful for sneaking up to enemies without receiving counterfire. Rosie and Isara begin to form a friendship and exchange gifts. Isara gives Rosie a protective doll charm and, in exchange, wants to hear Rosie sing. However, this moment is cut short.
You want me? It's a promise. Isara.
Down!
No.
Isara is killed right in front of Rosie, and her death greatly affects everyone in Squad 7, especially Rosie and Welkin. Rosie sings at Isara's burial to honor Isara's final wish. While very sad, Alicia and Welkin get a second win when they return to Brule. They realize that, though she's gone, life will find a way to keep going, symbolized by the lion's paw now growing in Brule. Once the war is over, they can rebuild. I feel like the developers gave you the Isara smoke rounds right before her death as sort of a memento. You may start to use it every mission and you will be reminded of Isara's contributions to the war, even though she is gone. In a revisit to the desert area, Alicia is sniped similar to Isara, but how can lightning strike the same spot twice? Fooling no one, Alicia just falls into a 24-hour coma. We discover that Alicia has been, unbeknownst to nearly everyone, a Valkyria herself, and Faldio was the one that shot her, but for a good reason, sort of. It's basically a twist on the atomic bomb dilemma. Is it immoral to implement such a devastatingly destructive weapon if it could potentially save more lives than it will take? An entranced Alicia fights Salvaria once again in the desert. She defeats Salvaria, but in her entranced state, Alicia rampages against the encroaching enemies and continues to fight alongside the player. With her tail in between her legs, Salvaria returns to Maximilian, begging him to give her a second chance. But it seems like Max has a suicide mission in mind. The fight against Salvaria is maybe one of the best and more difficult missions in the game. You are surrounded by walls that loom over your squad, while Salvaria is just raining bullets down at you. You need to climb the stairs, circle around the tower, and approach her from both sides. Otherwise, she will shoot you down or dodge every shot. Once defeated, she is captured and blows herself up in a big, beautiful mushroom cloud. Fortunately, the only casualties are assholes. During the next mission, General Jaeger has a really silly gimmick in that he has a powerful tank that has a bunch of metal plating everywhere. Why didn't they just make all of their tanks have all this plating? And just use anything you can to cover up the big, glowing blue Death Star radiator. After being defeated, he does the best thing one could do in this situation. He gives up and walks home. Jaeger isn't really committed to Maximilian's cause, but fought for him because Maximilian conquered his homeland. Peace out! In the thrilling conclusion to the war, Maximilian drives his big-ass tank right into Castle Rangries, asks to marry Princess Cordelia, and almost gets away with it. But Cordelia finally stands up for herself and reveals her family's well-kept secret. She is a Darkson. Her tribe, hundreds of years ago, sold out the other Darkson tribes and were rewarded with Gallia. And, by the way, the castle tower is also a big Valkyria lance in disguise. Squad 7 manages to stop the Marmota and destroy the lance cannon. Maximilian uses horrible science to give himself Valkyria powers. For this final mission, you need to destroy the towers, giving him power. Then just unload on him in glorious bastard style. Just execute him with the power of teamwork and friendship. Once it's all done, Faldio shows up to DDT Max into the old explosion hole. A true villain's death. It looks like Alicia and Vulcan will also be caught in the explosion, but in a Sonic 2-esque maneuver, Leon shows up with the plane Isara built. They fly into the sunset in a bright future, ready to head home and put this conflict behind them. We get a Where Are They Now sequence, and in a post-credit scene, Alicia and Vulcan are married, and have a little fusion child named Isara. Oh, bless. Once you're done with the main campaign, the game offers a few DLC missions, and the only one really worth playing is the one featuring Salvaria. It fleshes out her character and humanizes some of the Empire soldiers. You revisit 2 of the maps from the main campaign, and for this, using orders is a must. Salvaria gets to use her overpowered gun, and the campaign has 2 separate paths which lead to a twist on what is basically the same mission with slightly different conditions. If you get an A or S rank in all 3 missions, you can play a mission as Salvaria with a Valkyria's lance, which is sort of fun since it's not something you get to see in the main game. I remember the instant I saw this game, I was taken in by its absolutely stunning visuals, which have not aged a day thanks to the art style and the recent pivot to high definition during the PS3 era. Valkyria Chronicles forgoes a photorealistic and bleak style to offer us something we do not usually associate when we think game loosely based on World War II, an appreciation for beauty in nature. Visually, we can see that the game takes inspiration from manga. Shadows are given hatching, onomatopoeia sound effects pop out of tank treads as it rolls across the battlefield, characters are drawn in that manga style to make certain traits stand out. For the most part, the game does a good job evoking the style of the 1930s and 40s, while still having its own look and feel as a fantasy world. The uniforms aren't overdone, they look sharp and usually pretty practical other than the Stormtrooper Biggs and Wedge armor the Imperials wear, and the ornate but inspired by real-life garments the Regals wear. The landscape you encounter in fake anime Europe are rendered with beautiful light blues and greens. The towns are laid with warm red bricks. On the battlefield, you constantly hear barrages of gunfire and explosion in the distance, creating the illusion of a larger war taking place. The game has a framing device of a history book written by a news reporter you meet in the game, Irene Kohler. You flip between pages of the book, and you can rewatch cutscenes you saw earlier at any time. It's a little piece of world building that I enjoy. By playing the game, you're making history. The game contains a detailed section on various terms and people you encounter throughout the story. Even though the game is linear and mission-based, being able to read about the people on your squad does give them bits of characterization you wouldn't know otherwise. You may learn something about the culture of the Darkson people, or why there is a desert in the middle of what is basically Northern Europe. Thematically, the game has several motifs. The game gives us a schmaltzy and tired lesson that the power of teamwork defeats all, but ultimately they want to show that individuals with differences can work towards a common goal, which is a nice sentiment. Producer Ryotaro Nonaka stated that the art removes the player from the nasty side of war and lets them focus on the characters. I do think this fits with what they're doing. They wish to tell an uplifting story about characters overcoming an overwhelming force far greater than themselves through clever tactics and teamwork. The tone of the story is at times reminiscent of a World War II movie from the 1950s. War is fairly clean, no one bleeds from being shot 26 times in the chest, the good little guys fight the big bad guys. Audiences today are a little more used to darker stories about World War II. Everyone in Gallia has gone through mandatory military training in school, and instead of being a depressing Starship Troopers fascist society, everyone is pretty happy because the training is just in self-defense for the country. Hoorah! The decision to not set it in actual World War II gives them the freedom to tell this story, without any real-world implications. Though many elements of the setting have real-life analogs, the Empire is a mesh of Nazi Germany, the Ottoman Empire, and Russia. Gallia is sort of like France or Poland. The Atlantic Federation is a stand-in for the Allied forces. The Darksons are Jews and other ethnic groups that were persecuted in Nazi-controlled areas. The Valkyria are an Aryan master race, though they actually have crazy superpowers that also make them the equivalent of the atomic bomb, which also makes them stronger than any other human, which is a really odd thing to include in your story about how absurd racism is. That foible aside, the game does tackle racism in ways that work better than one may expect, thanks mainly to the game's attempts at world building, though I do feel like perhaps it could have been a little more realistic if people were more ignorant to the Darkson people and their culture. Really, only Rosie and a few villains express any hatred towards the Darkson people. You don't get any scenes as someone who is good-natured like Alicia make assumptions based on stereotypes. It's not from a place of hatred, just culturally enforced misconceptions. In Valkyria Chronicles, either you hate Darkson people, or you are indifferent. There's no one hesitantly being pressured to participate in the oppression of someone who has thought, well, maybe this is wrong, but this is what we do. Think about World War II propaganda. People today still may hold on to the stereotypes from that era. Otherwise, decent people still fall prey to those beliefs, but that's not really an area ever explored in this game, which is baffling considering some of the lore. The Darksons were blamed by the Valkyria for the Darkson calamity, which destroyed many lives and cities. Ever since, the Darksons have faced discrimination, while the Valkyria are treated as divinity. The calendar is even based on the years since they've subdued the Darksons. That's just how important their oppression is. It's the equivalent of Jesus being born, or people going into space in Gundam UC. All of the Darkson in this game have no last name. They were stripped of all their titles, thus a lot of them get jobs working in Ragnite mines. Characters will reference the stereotype that Darksons smell from working in the mines. Like I mentioned before, the game alludes to a larger world with its own history, and I appreciate the effort to flesh things out. Despite the game's plucky 1950s war movie tone, we are given a handful of instances of gray morality. Not everyone in Gallia is a shining hero, And I like that. When we think about a conflict like World War II, we generally think of the Allies as being good and the Axis as being evil. But countries like the United States still had terrible issues with racism, places like the UK still participated in colonialism, and the good guys were not free from questionable actions and beliefs. People in power still exploit the common person even in the good countries. On that note, not every German soldier was an ice-cold killer. They still had families and goals in life interrupted by war. Disclaimer, this is not an excuse for genocide or mass murder. So for one example, we have General Damon, who serves as a bit of a foil to Welkin. Welkin, being the son of a great soldier, probably could have made a career out of the military. But Welkin fights because it's his duty. He knows a lot about nature. He sees conflict as a natural part of life. Animals fight for survival every day, and humans are no different. Though he takes no pleasure in it, taking up arms is something that needs to be done, but he also realizes that animals coexist, and they collaborate. There is a duality there. Damon, adorned with medals, comes from a military family, and he's kind of an asshole who really doesn't care about the average soldier's well-being. It's clear he does it for the glory. Another character, the Gallian Chancellor, is also a sellout to the Empire, and just looks like an ornate prick. Both get their karma-induced deaths. The Federation, who are basically the Allies in World War II, at one point attempt to kidnap the Princess of Gallia in a power move to claim Gallia's resources. A few times, the game tries to bring some humanity to the people in the Empire. A wounded soldier is taken in by Welkin and Alicia. While attempting to nurse him back to health, he passes due to the severity of his injuries. The next day, his squad finds Welkin and Alicia with the fallen Imperial's gear. They realize they gave him a proper burial, and they leave Welkin and Alicia peacefully out of respect. Throughout the game, we learn about Silvaria's rough upbringing in research facilities, how she was eventually saved by Maximilian, and here saved is sort of a misnomer because his intent is far from chivalrous. She was fooled into falling in love with someone that just wanted her power. She would die for him, but he only saw her as a tool. She became his right hand and a pawn. It's a tragic set of events that may have you feeling a bit sorry for your enemy. Ultimately, Valkyria Chronicles has a pretty idealistic outlook on everything. Friendship and the human spirit win the day.
So clear. So blue.
The sky is fair. It'll always be above everyone's head, no difference.
Though things may get dark, humans can overcome and survive through the worst conditions, much like the lion's paw flower that bookends the story. Humanity has the strength to survive and carry on, even in the darkest times. People end up changing for the better, and the people who were bad get what's coming to them. It can sometimes be a silly game, but it manages to hit most of its notes very well. And I like a game that delivers on its story, presentation, and premise, but also is a whole lot of fun to play. And this is why a game like Valkyria Chronicles is in some ways an underappreciated gem from the PS3 era. One that I think probably deserves your time at some point. Just want to thank everyone for listening. Bye-bye.